Once again, let's do this. Like I said from before, last week, trade diplomacy took a heavy hit as the United States imposed a 30% tariff increase on key South African exports, citing what it called growing concerns over governance, international alignments, and domestic policy issues in Pretoria. Now, while the South African government scrambles to announce support measures for affected exporters, critics are pointing fingers, not just to Washington, but at domestic groups they say helped fan the flames.
And at the center of the storm is AfriForum. It's a prominent South African civil society organization known for the right-leaning activism. AfriForum has previously lobbied U.S. officials directly, warning about alleged government corruption, anti-minority policies, and even raising claims of a white genocide in South Africa. One of the men who stood before the U.S. Congress as part of that lobbying campaign is our guest, Ernst Van Zyl. Is the head of public relations for AfriForum. Mr. Van Zyl, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you for coming on. Let's start with the basics. What is AfriForum's official position on the recent 30% tariff hike by the U.S. government on South African exports?
Right, I just want to quickly correct something. When it comes to AfriForum's stance on the issue of farm murders in South Africa, we do not call farm murders a white genocide. That's not a terminology that AfriForum uses. So I'm not going to be talking about an issue of quote-unquote white genocide here in your conversation, seeing as that's not an AfriForum stance. What is AfriForum's stance on the tariffs? Well, for the past 90 days, just like the rest of the world, South Africa, the South African government specifically, had the option to negotiate with the United States, to come to the negotiating table and work out a deal. But 90 days later, there's no deal. The South African government seems to be scrambling to try and put something together. But the United States put very clear criteria on the table in regards to what needs to be addressed domestically in South Africa to make a deal possible. And the South African government doesn't seem to want to make any concessions on any of the points raised by the United States government. And those four issues include, and we can go into them in detail if you want, but the four main issues that the United States government mentioned was, firstly, that farm murders in South Africa need to be need to be addressed properly and given the attention that they deserve from the government. Secondly, racially discriminatory policies by the South African government need to end. Thirdly, that murderous chants like kill the Boer, kill the farmer by high-profile politicians need to be condemned by the government. And then fourthly, no confiscation of property may happen, no expropriation of land without compensation will be permitted. Those are the criteria that the United States put on the table, and the South African government has not addressed a single one of them.
Okay, well, very interesting, Mr. Van Zyl, but your organization has been to Washington before, and they warned of these chants that you speak of, and also discrimination against white South Africans. So do you see these tariffs that have now been imposed as a result of your lobbying efforts, or are they related to maybe your views?
Well, they are most certainly related to the South African government not addressing the issues that the American government has mentioned. I can't really say how much role AfriForum played. We're just the civil rights organization in South Africa. We have been lobbying to bring attention to these issues, but these are real issues. I mean, talking about these issues should not be controversial, but caring about farm murders, caring about private property rights, caring about standing against racial discrimination, these things should not be seen as controversial. Some politicians frame them as controversial. But no, I don't think these tariffs are mainly the result of, or even largely the result of AfriForum specifically. They are largely and primarily the result of the South African government's failure to come to the negotiating table. As we know, I mean, now it's already been reported, but the South African president appointed a special envoy to the United States whose mission was to negotiate and talk to the American government. That was all the way back in May this year. But the last 90 days, that special envoy to the United States, Mr. Jonas, has just been missing in action. It's being reported that his visa was rejected and that his credentials rejected by the Americans. And this is something that they warned the South African government about, and the South African government just pushed on anyway. So South Africa has effectively been without diplomatic representation in Washington for the past critical 90 days. So, I mean, it's just one of the examples of how this is squarely the result of government failure in South Africa, and they're trying to create a scapegoat by blaming civil society organizations for their own failures.
Many in South Africa, I mean, like you rightfully said, they including members of the ANC and business leaders as well, have said that this is economic sabotage. So how do you respond to this? How do you respond to these accusations that AfriForum's actions abroad are hurting the very economy that supports millions of South Africans, regardless of race? Mrs. Zyl, are you there?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Well, we seem to be having some issues here with the connection. We're hoping that Mr. Ernst Van Zyl can hear us, but we could hear everything that you said from before. So once again, we're going to try and see if you could hear our question. Go ahead, Jim.
Can you hear me now? Mr. Ernst Van Zyl, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Zyl?
Okay. Tell you what, this is a very interesting conversation, Mr. Zyl, if you can hear us, and to our viewers. Let's try and get that connection right so we can fire off a few other questions which we've been trying to get from Mr. Zyl. We'll be back.
Welcome back. Earlier, we're discussing about the 30% tariff hike that has now been slammed on the U.S. on South Africa by the U.S. government. Now, we're speaking to one of the men who stood before the U.S. Congress as part of lobbying campaign of AfriForum, and that is our guest, Ernst Van Zyl, is the head of public relations for AfriForum. Now, before the break, you were talking about, the shortcomings of the government of South Africa in helping to, reduce the tariff hike that that U.S. was most likely going to slam on South Africa. But many in South Africa, including members of the ANC and business leaders, see this as economic sabotage. How do you respond to those allegations or those accusations by the government, who have said that the actions of the AfriForum have sabotaged the economy regardless of race?
Well, I mean, firstly, I've not seen any business leaders or any real organizations with integrity making that claim. It's just politicians that are making that claim, and specifically those politicians whose failings are the responsible for these tariffs making those claims. So they're desperately trying to get a scapegoat, but they've got no proof. I mean, if you're going to make those types of wild accusations as a politician in South Africa, you better have evidence, and they've not been able to bring a shred of evidence to the table, only sound and fury signifying nothing.
Well, very interesting. We've got so many questions for you. We're not stopping there. Now, critics say AfriForum's international lobbying misrepresents the reality in South Africa. I don't know how you feel about that. They say framing complex inequality issues as targeted persecution. So you said not to speak about it as genocide. Let's use the word targeted persecution now. So what's your response to that?
Right. Well, there's very, very concrete evidence of targeted racial discrimination by the South African government. This is not something that you have to go dig very deep to find. It's very easy to find. The South African government has over 140 race-based laws, many of which discriminate very directly against the white minority in South Africa. This is a fact. This is not speculation. This is not a conspiracy theory. People can go look up this legislation for themselves. They exist. So the government just screaming about denying that these laws exist is not going to work. They exist. I mean, the South African government discriminates against white South Africans in sport, in business, in employment, in promotion. In every facet of society, there are laws that mandate government discrimination against white South Africans, and those laws are there for everyone to see. I mean, they give these laws beautiful names like Black Economic Empowerment, but it has nothing to do with Black Economic Empowerment. It is simply laws that mandate businesses to discriminate based on race when it comes to hiring people, when it comes to promoting people. And there's many examples. One of the examples that is very prominent is Dis-Chem. So one of the largest pharmacy companies in South Africa, recently there was a memo that leaked from internally by the CEO of that company. And that CEO wrote in that internal memo that the company Dis-Chem, the pharmacy company, is going to put a total freeze on any hiring or promotion of white people because the government is threatening them with major fines if they don't. That is active discrimination. That is persecution and targeting of a minority group by the government. And it's very clear for all to see.
Hang on a second, Mr. Van Zyl.
There was a sports team earlier this year in cricket that was disqualified and fined because they didn't have, because they had too many white players on their team.
I don't want you to go too far.
So these are many examples of this.
Now, I don't want you to go too far regarding that issue that you just raised. It was a thing of quota that they were asked that they employ a certain quota that represents, well, the vastness of the South African population, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, that's racial discrimination. If you're telling a business that they should be, if a white person applies for a job, they should tell them you won't get the job because you're white. That's racial discrimination. That's wrong.
Would you say to, or what would you say to ordinary South Africans, especially the black farmers and small business owners, whose exports would be affected by these tariffs? How do you justify AfriForum's international strategy to them?
Well, AfriForum never advocated for tariffs. We never asked the United States to put tariffs on South Africa.
But the tariffs have now been initiated.
Due to policies of the South African.
But critics have said that these tariffs have now been initiated due to the lobbying of AfriForum.
And that's the South African government, who has been completely just non-existent at the negotiating table until now, from all that we can see. And the United States told the South African government, you need to address these 4 issues if we are to negotiate for a trade deal. And the South African government has not addressed a single one of those points that the US government put on the table. So for everyone who's not an ANC-aligned person, it's very clear to see who's to blame.
What are the numbers of, if we're going by race, what's the poverty line for the white South Africans and the black South Africans?
Where does it lie?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm asking about the poverty line. I'm asking about the poverty line. Where does it lie between the white South Africans and the black South Africans?
Unfortunately, the sound is breaking up again, as I can't hear the question.
How many white persons are poor and how many black persons are poor? What's the poverty ratio? You still can't hear me?
Unfortunately, we seem to have that issue. Mr. Van Zyl,
unfortunately, can't hear anything.
Can you hear me now? Am I audible?
I don't know. There seems to be some problem on your studio side. I can't hear anything.
Right.
We'll try and fix that. Just do stay put. We'll try and fix that. Judith, very interesting question that you should ask there. For me, it is whatever has been caused now is what I find very interesting, that everybody has to now suffer this 30% tariffs that the US has imposed on South Africa. And I'm wondering, well, hey, we got unpressed, like in Nigerian parlance, you've pressed spoil.
Yeah.
And it's going to affect you at this point. But we're still inquiring from Mr. Van Zyl here exactly what the intentions were for AfriForum at the start of the year and how this could, I really want to know whether the relationship between South Africa and America is going to deteriorate from now. So when he comes back on board, I'm hoping that he could actually answer that. If South Africa now is talking about support measures for exporters, likely exploring diplomatic counter steps, is this going to mean that we're just going to do our bit here to try and save the situation, but we're no longer friends? That's the question I'm going to be asking him. If we can get him back, if we can fix the audio, we're hoping that is, unfortunately, we're being told that we have lost Mr. Van Zyl due to poor network, which is very unfortunate because that conversation. Okay, Mr. Van Zyl, I'm hoping that you're back with us. Mr. Ernst Van Zyl, you are back. Yes, I can
hear you.
All right, so I was asking earlier about the poverty line between the black and white South Africans.
kind as to repeat it, please. I'll gladly answer.
Poverty line between black and white South Africans. Can you tell us what's the ratio?
Well, I don't have those statistics, particularly what percentage of white South Africans are below the poverty line and which percentage of black South Africans. I don't have those percentages, but I mean the majority of impoverished South Africans are black South Africans, and that's thanks to 30 years of failed policies of the South African government. I mean, there's a strange trend going on that the more race-based laws that the South African government implements, the higher the poverty rate and the higher the unemployment rate rises. These policies are not addressing poverty in South Africa. They're just creating a new elite, a new race-based elite in South Africa out of those with the right political connections. So on the one side, they're not race-based laws in South Africa and racial discrimination in South Africa are not addressing the poverty issue. And on the other side, it's not really even, it's not morally, it's not morally correct.
What are these policies that you speak of that is, impoverishing the black South Africans? What are the policies? Can you name a couple of them, please?
Yeah, I can name some. So firstly, there's the Black Economic Empowerment Act, as I said, which has a beautiful name but has nothing to do with black economic empowerment. It is a piece of legislation that mandates racial discrimination against white South Africans. There's the Employment Equity Act that does the same. There's the Competition Act, which also mandates racial discrimination in competitive matters when it comes to corporates. There is the Public Procurement Act, which also mandates racial discrimination in public procurement matters as it pertains to the state. The list goes on, and many of these examples are broad and far-reaching. For example, the Employment Equity Act and the Black Economic Empowerment Act are applicable to every facet of business in South Africa. It mandates racial discrimination, strict racial discrimination against minorities in South Africa across the board, in small businesses and large businesses.
Right.
And racial discrimination by the government is wrong. It was wrong in the past and it's wrong in the present. And it's not even alleviating poverty. It's just creating a new small elite of those with the right political connections.
You don't think equity can alleviate poverty? You don't think that more policies to sort of close that gap that you speak of, when you say that, the poverty ratio, more blacks are more impoverished than white, and you don't think that employing more of them, tipping that gap in between is not the solution? That's what you're saying. It's not the solution. Instead, it's racially motivated. Yes or no?
Alleviated poverty, then we would have had poverty alleviation in the past 30 years, and the unemployment rate would have decreased because the government has over 140 race-based laws in the past, still on the books in the past 30 years, adding new ones every year, and the unemployment rate keeps rising. So I don't see the connection. I don't see the connection between uplifting people and the government discriminating based on race. It's only creating a new elite class of those with the right political connections, and it's not uplifting or empowering anyone. Like I say, these laws have these beautiful names like employment equity and black economic empowerment, but it does the opposite. It doesn't make people more equal, and it doesn't empower anyone. It only empowers the wallets of politicians with the right, who know the right people.
Okay, this would be my last question, but it's two-pronged. First off, I don't know, is it a thing of representation for white South Africa in governance, perhaps? That's one. On the other hand, South Africa now has started talking about employing support measures for exporters. They're exploring diplomatic counter steps. Do you think that this is going to affect the relationship between South Africa and the U.S. going on forward? Do you think it will deteriorate? Do you think that white South Africa has anything to gain from this at the end of the day?
Right, so the first prong of your question in regards to political representation for the white minority in South Africa, well, the South African government and the ANC in particular is quite anti-white in its rhetoric and in its policies and very hostile towards the white minority. So I don't see them giving whites any real political representation, maybe some window dressing, maybe some token whites here and there, but not real representation in the sense of that the white minority in South Africa can actually have an influence and push back against laws that discriminate against them and their children. And that's why organizations like AfriForum exist, civil rights organizations outside of party politics, to bring about a real change in South Africa, because party politics has failed in all South Africans, but minorities in particular in regards to party politics, not really putting an end to racial discrimination and not doing anything about the farm murder epidemic in South Africa. In regards to some of the measures that the South African government are now putting into place to counteract the effects of these tariffs, well, it's a bandage or a little plaster on an axe wound. What they should have done is they should have negotiated for the past 90 days and gotten a trade deal. They should have listened to what the American government had to say when the American government said, we want you to address problem A, B, C, and D. The South African government should have looked at those problems. They shouldn't, what they did instead was to put their head in the sand like an ostrich and deny that these problems exist. And then they attacked those organizations that care about these problems, like AfriForum. There's now a high treason investigation against AfriForum in South Africa because the South African government attacks the critics and the messengers rather than attacks the problems, and the problems are very clear for all to see. And that's unfortunately the state of affairs when it comes to the latest in this diplomatic crisis. And it really is a crisis. It's one of the largest and most serious diplomatic crises in South Africa's history since 1994. It's going to have a major effect on South Africa, and the government is missing in action. Like I said, our special envoy to the United States, our special diplomat who was appointed for this situation, is sitting in Johannesburg. He's not sitting in Washington. Why is that? That's a question the government needs to answer.
I have a question as well. It's a rhetorical question,
Sure.
and that is for a country that is predominantly black, it's very interesting that the poverty ratio is also black as well. But anyway, I want to say thank you, Ernst. Thank you so much, Ernst. This is all we can take. We have to wrap up the hour. Ernst Van Zyl, I want to say thank you for coming on. He is the head of public relations for AfriForum. Once again, thank you. We appreciate you.